Welcome to the PR Maven Podcast, a podcast all about growing your network and building your brand through traditional and digital networking techniques. I'm Nancy Marshall, the PR Maven and CEO of Marshall Communications. I've been strengthening brands through PR for over 35 years, and now I'm celebrating the success of executives, influencers, business owners, and entrepreneurs from all around the world, all of whom have cultivated their brands and broadened their networks through traditional and digital networking methods. Each week, I interview one of these interesting and influential individuals and provide an opportunity for you, the PR Maven Nation, to gain insights from their strategies and stories. So stay tuned for this week's episode, and thanks for listening. Welcome to the PR Maven Podcast, episode number 149, presented by Marshall Communications, creator of the Marshall Plan's 65-step strategic process. For those of you new to the show, I'm your host, Nancy Marshall, the PR Maven and CEO of Marshall Communications. Welcome. And with me today is my guest, Spencer Stevens, who's author of Church of Golf and the newly released Blood Lily. Spencer, welcome to the PR Maven Podcast.
Thank you very much, Nancy. It's very nice to be here.
It's nice to have you here. So yeah, this is the first time that I've had a guest who's been live with me. Actually, since I was in the studio, but this is our new home studio, and it's great to have Spencer here. So Spencer Stevens escaped a tense existence as a big city trial attorney and is now content to be settled in Belfast, Maine, where he writes novels. His first novel, entitled Church of Golf, tells the story of a washed-up college football hero who reaches middle age and finds himself broke, drunk, lumpy, and sucking for air. For him, the way back involves religious devotion to the study of golf. And having known golfers, I know that it can become a religious devotion. His second novel, Blood Lily, was recently published in July of 2021. It tells the story of a Saudi woman, a member of the royal family, whose father coerces her into going to America to run a terrorist cell. She's desperate to escape the network of violent authoritarians who control her life, and she yearns for peace and contentment. Naturally, she dreams of life in Maine, where life is good. After college, Spencer enjoyed a career in journalism, writing for daily newspapers, and becoming a polished feature and news writer. While in law school, he and his wife founded a small publishing company. He practiced law for 25 years, handling civil lawsuits all over Maryland and in Washington, D.C. He established his own law firm in 2000 and remained head of the firm for nearly 20 years when he made the wise decision to move here to Maine. So Spencer, tell us about your career and how you got into full-time writing.
My career and writing all sort of ran together, I guess you might say. The writing part, I think I was a writer from a very early age and just didn't realize it. I always had pads and notebooks around. I was always writing. If I was reading a book or studying something, I was always writing, taking notes. It just seemed like something that was programmed into me that I always would be writing. And even today, I have tons of notebooks and legal pads with ideas and notes and details about scenes and characters. It's never, ever stopped. When I was in the law firm setting, I did tons of writing for judges and clients and things. And very commonly, details of the type that I would put into a novel would find their way into the briefs that I would submit, to the point where I had submitted a long motion for a judge, and I had actually described the witnesses briefly, each witness. My goal was to separate each of the witnesses whose testimony was put into this motion that I was writing. And when I was arguing in front of the judge says, "Mr. Stevens, I know every single product. I've never met any of the people you've written about, but I know them all from having read your brief." It was a nice compliment. It felt good that I was able, with very few words, to create a picture for somebody and to help make my argument more effective. But writing has just kind of been almost like breathing. It just seems to go with me wherever I go. I've always enjoyed doing it.
Well, I always think that people who find their calling and can actually make a living what they were born to do are very lucky people. I feel like I was lucky to find my calling early on. And now that you're here in the state of Maine, where there's a long history of very successful writers.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, Edna St. Vincent Millay,
Yes.
who you've named characters after.
Yeah.
Stephen King, obviously,
Yeah.
and many, many more.
There's some wonderful writers in Maine, and I've had the pleasure of meeting quite a few. I met Lily King some time ago. Ann Beatty, who you may have heard of, is an adopted Mainer. I think she lives most of the year in Virginia, but she has a home near Blue Hill. And Paul Dwarin, who I think you're familiar with. Anyway, Maine is just full of really good writers. It seems like the kind of place that attracts folks who want to write. And I came to Maine at the end of 2020 and was finishing up my novel when I first got here. And I don't think I've ever had a stretch as productive or as enjoyable devoted to writing as when I first got to Maine. It's something about the place just brings out the creative side of a person.
Yeah, I think the natural beauty is a great backdrop for creativity.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So, Spencer, how much work does it take to write a good book?
Even a bad book takes a lot of work. A good book takes a ton of work. I am working with a writer. Her name is Andrea, and I went through her manuscript, which is partway done. I think she's about a year and a half into it. And we sat down last week so I could critique her manuscript and give her my comments. And when we finished, she's like, "I've got another year and a half of work to go." And I said, "Yeah, probably so." I spent 5 years on Blood Lily, and it was steady, constant, intense work. It wasn't like I would work for a month and take off. It never stopped. A good book requires you to look at like a lattice work of facts and characters, and you've just got to make sure that all the little pieces fit together just right. If you move one over here in chapter 12, what you probably got to do is begin with your manuscript at the very beginning, read through it, and make sure that new detail is consistent with everything else you've put down. It's delicate, it's time consuming, and hopefully you enjoy it, which I do. It takes a lot. It really does. It's a lot of work and a lot of time.
I think most people underestimate how much time and effort it takes to write a good book.
Oh, yeah. And the writing part, just to get a first draft together, is relatively easy and quick. It's the editing and revisions that take up the time, because as soon as you take a manuscript and share it with people and they start telling you what they've seen, you see 1,000 reasons why you've got to add, subtract, modify. Every pair of eyeballs that looks at your work see something that you haven't. And inevitably that brings you to the idea of, okay, I've got to, this character really doesn't matter that much. I'm not sure I want to feature them so much. This particular narrative right here needs to be added to, because it really adds to this person's character, who's a central character, a protagonist. There's all kinds of things that pop up along those lines that keep you occupied and keep you going.
So what is your writing schedule?
Most days I get up early in the morning, early 7:30-ish. That's early for me. And I put on some coffee, and as soon as the coffee is ready, I get a cup and I'm with my computer, and I'll sit and write for at least 3 hours, sometimes 4 if I'm feeling very productive. And unless I'm like under deadline, I'll try to cut myself off and leave my desk feeling like I've still got ideas. I still want to keep working. If that feeling is with me for the day, like I really want to keep writing, it feeds me the next day when I go back to the computer. And then afternoons and evenings, I usually spend reading as much as I can, which is just as important a part of the process as the writing is. So much of what you learn comes from other people's books. And there's so many books out there. There's just every year, there's somewhere around 1 million books that come out. It's just a phenomenal process. And I think we're seeing something of a renaissance in the novel and the nonfiction world, both. There's so much good material coming out these days. It's a joy to be a reader.
Well, yeah, I think being a reader is essential to having a good life, really. I mean, being able to imagine a story in your mind. And I always remember when I was little, my mom used to encourage me to read, not just watch movies, because she said, when you read a book, you create the movie in your mind.
She's exactly right. Your mom, she knew it. Reading a book requires you to employ your imagination. And once you go down that road and you enjoy using your imagination, reading becomes an absolute pleasure. For most of us, learning to read is some work, and learning to build reading into our schedule takes a little doing.
Right.
But at some point, light bulbs go off and you start to read passages that conjure images to your mind, that make you feel emotions. And all of a sudden, you're reading a book and you just want to keep going. You don't want to stop. It feels so good.
Yeah, that's what you call a page turner.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
So where do you get your inspiration and ideas for your books?
All over.
Yeah.
Every place and any place. My wife and I went to the Grove Cemetery in Belfast yesterday just to look around. They have headstones in the cemetery that date back to the Revolutionary War. And looking at the headstones, I came up with 3 ideas for stories. There was one headstone with a family's name on it, and it had 3 kids who were born in the 1930s, about 2 years apart, and none of them lived more than 9 years.
Oh,
and I thought, there's a story. There's a family that went through hell. And if you wanted to do some research, if you wanted to apply your imagination, you could develop something. But everywhere you go, you talk to a clerk in the drugstore who is complaining about having to take on 3 jobs and their kids are at home and they don't get to see their kids like they want to. It's like, oh, there's a story. Everywhere you go, there's always something.
Right.
Yeah.
And it pays to notice things to be a good author,
Yes, it
right?
does. Yes,
to
it
notice everywhere you go, from the birds
Yeah.
to the animals,
Right.
and humans.
Everything.
Yeah.
Logos on trucks, small mannerisms that people have, the way a tone of voice changes when a subject comes up. There's a million little bits and pieces that make up human nature, that make up nature generally, that make up the life around us that we see in the way of things. And it all weaves in. And one of the things I've always enjoyed when I see somebody else's writing is when they pick up on some detail that I've noticed, but like subconsciously. And suddenly I realize, oh yeah, I've seen that 1,000 times. And somebody just brought it to life for me all of a sudden.
Right.
Anyway, the power of observation is essential to being a good writer. I think it helps a ton.
And obviously, I mean, you were both a journalist and an attorney before you started writing full time. What did you learn as a lawyer and a journalist that you bring to your writing?
How many hours do you have? In both cases, I got a really good education in human nature, a really good education in studying the style of conversation, of mannerisms of people. As a lawyer in particular, when you go into court and you're going to try a case, you're thinking intensely about what's this person going to say and how are they going to say it? What words are they going to use? How excited or how deceptive might they be? There's an analysis that I was required to engage in that I'd never really done before. And after a number of years of doing that, I suddenly began looking at people differently. I began assessing human nature in a much more complex way. and I was working with other lawyers who were very smart, and they were doing the same thing, and we would compare notes, and there was a learning process about human nature, about human mannerisms that was invaluable. It taught me so much about how to depict people, how to write dialogue, how to describe people, what matters about people. If you're looking at a person who's going to be a witness in front of a jury, as a lawyer, you're thinking, what are they going to wear? Are they going to sit up straight and look at people, or are they going to, cower a little bit and mumble? There's so many parts of what make that witness a memorable person. Some of them exciting, some of them subtle, and that's all really an essential part of what I learned lawyering that goes into my novels now. There's a lot of ways you can learn those kinds of things. For me, the lawyering was a great way to do it. I enjoyed most of it, and it was hard work.
Yeah,
but
I know.
It was a great training ground.
At one point, I thought about going to law school, and then it's like, oh boy, all those years of reading books in the law library. I decided I would rather go into public relations.
if you don't have a real commitment, a real fire in the belly about law school and lawyering, it's probably not a good choice. Right. You've got to really want to do it. It's 3 years in law school is it's a trek. It
intense.
Really is. It's very tough.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of good lawyers who have become good writers. John Grisham and Scott Turow, I'll just mention his two. They write thrillers, mostly of a legal bent, and they're very, very popular. Audiences love their work, and I do too. I find their stuff fascinating, and I can see where they learn their stuff. They went through the same training ground that I did, and I can see it pays dividends for them. It's tremendous to see.
Well, this is so interesting, and we're going to hear more from Spencer, but now it's time to remind you about my latest book, which is Grow Your Audience, Grow Your Brand. And if you go to prmaven.com/giveaway, you can download a free copy there. And we'll be right back with more from Spencer Stevens.
Hi, I'm Julene Gervais, host of the television program Greenlight, Maine. Nancy Marshall's book, Grow Your Audience, Grow Your Brand, helped our team tremendously develop a loyal following, and it helped us expand with 2 television programs called the Greenlight Maine College Edition and Elevating Voices. Plus, we've picked up 3 Emmy nominations. I highly recommend you read Nancy's book to grow your brand.
Well, that was great to see my friend Julene Gervais, and her son Jack Gervais is here with us today. He's our audio engineer. So welcome back to the PR Maven Podcast. We're talking with Spencer Stevens. And actually now the podcast is also available on Facebook and YouTube. So Spencer, you decided to invest in our services for public relations. What brought you to that decision?
Well, when I looked, first off, it started with the fact that I wanted to make a living as a writer. I enjoy writing. I'm not independently wealthy, and I would like to be able to write books and have folks buy them so that I can, make a living doing that. I realized I had to make an investment if I want to reach that goal. I have a lot of friends and acquaintances who are writers, some of whom do awesome work. There's a fellow I know out in Indiana named Ted Morrissey who writes awesome books. And whenever I chat with him, forgive me, Ted, if you happen to see this, he's lamenting the fact that he doesn't have good sales. He writes some of the best books you've ever read, and people don't know about him. And I said, Ted, you have got to get out and put yourself out there. The marketing and the promotion and the publicity are essential. If you don't have about 1 million people who at least know who you are, you're not going to sell 10,000 books. It's urgently essential if you want to go there. So that's what motivated me. It was just a want and a need to get my book out there and get it noticed.
Yeah, it's not like a field of dreams where you build it and they will come.
Not really. No, there's very few people who write books and they get lucky. Something happens, and the audience does come. But for most of us, you're right. It doesn't happen that way.
Yeah. So part of what my agency is doing for you is working on your personal brand by positioning you as a thought leader. What do you see as advantages of this kind of work?
It's helpful in a number of ways. Partly when I'm putting together opinion pieces or articles that deal with things like authoritarianism, I'm learning more and more about this subject that I've already written about. And I enjoy that process. It also gets my name out there. It brings people to my brand, to my name. They see something I've written about authoritarianism, and they're interested, hopefully, because they like the writing or they like the subject, and they want to go look up my book and perhaps purchase it. And the other thing is, I still have a journalist in me. When I see something pop up in the Portland Press Herald and there's my byline, I feel all proud of myself, So.
And you did have an opinion column in the Maine Sunday Telegram this past Sunday, August 1st. Yep. So people can look that up on Google. Maine Sunday Telegram. It was called the Community Voices. And it's interesting, just now I made a connection. You wrote about authoritarianism, but we're talking about authority marketing, and both those words are based in the word authority, but it's very different.
and they're also based with the word author too.
Yeah.
When you think about it, I was just having a conversation with a friend the other day about that very, very subject. We're trying to figure out how is it that authoritarianism starts with author, and what happened to get it there. And I have no basis for this, but I suspect that some author wrote a book about some subject, began speaking on it, and they became known as an authority. And then, like a lot of writers do, it's an occupational hazard. They got a little too proud of themselves, maybe a little dictatorial. And then people were saying, he's an authoritarian.
Oh, yeah.
So maybe that doesn't happen that way, but it's one never knows.
Well, there is a very good book called Authority Marketing by two of my mentors, Drew McClellan and Stephen Wessner, which is Woessner. Mm-hmm. And that is about exactly what we're doing, where we're positioning you as an authority on authoritarianism.
Yes, that's wonderful. It's a great idea, and it's one that I'm happy to be pursuing. It feels like it fits really well with my book and what I'm trying to accomplish.
Yeah. So, are there other authors who you have seen doing a good job with public relations and personal branding?
Yes. Erin French, who I think you've heard of. She's a celebrity chef based in Freedom, Maine, but she's done two really good books. One is a cookbook, one is a memoir. And I had a chance to speak to her publicist, a fellow named Adam Peck. He lives on the West Coast. And she is putting herself out there as an authority on cooking, on life in Maine. And she is an authority on those things. These are things that she really does know about. And it helps a ton when you're thinking about, do I want to go to the Lost Kitchen? Where better to go if you're in Maine than to a restaurant owned by a born and raised Mainer like
if
Erin.
You can get in. It's impossible to get in. I've been trying to get in. And yes, her memoir, Finding Freedom, I actually listened to it as an Audible, and it was so engaging. And I know that she recently received an honorary degree from my alma mater, Colby College. Really? Yes.
Good for her.
At their graduation in June of 2021. She was honored.
I'm sure that was exciting for her.
Yeah.
Yes. She's had a big couple of years as she's built her restaurant and has gotten attention. She has done wonderful things, and I'm sure her family and friends are very proud of her. She's come very far.
Yeah, and I know that other chefs in Maine are a little bit jealous, actually, of the brand that she has been able to build. So my hats are off to Adam. I'd like to meet him sometime.
Yeah,
he's done a good job.
Very nice fellow. I enjoyed talking to him.
So is there a book, an app, or a website that you have found helpful in your life and career, and why?
Well, I don't know about apps or websites, but there's a lot of books that have been really instrumental in forming my thoughts about writing and even affecting me personally, affecting my worldview and my opinions about things. One in particular that is probably my favorite is called The Shipping News by Annie Proulx. It is an absolutely wonderful book. Came out, I think, in the early 1980s. And it's one of these rare books that is critically excellent. It has a literary quality to it that you don't often find. At the same time, it was very popular. True literary works don't always find a mass audience. This one did. In addition to that, Annie won herself a Pulitzer Prize for that book. So the society that gives a stamp of approval for literary works has given a stamp of approval, and it was made into a very successful and excellent movie. This is a piece of work that achieves art on several levels. And the book itself is a story about a guy who is a schlub. He's a down and out, kind of a round shouldered guy. And that book left an impression on me for so many reasons. One in particular was when Annie Proulx describes her characters, she doesn't say they had brown hair or they were tall or thin. She says he had a habit of putting his hand up to his chin anytime anybody came around because he was so nervous about his weak chin. Or she describes somebody and compares them to a particular coil of rope you might see in a ship that's designed to be walked on. And all of a sudden you begin to see an image of this person. The main character is a fellow named Coyle, and he's the schlubby guy I was referring to. And I don't think she describes him in terms of his height or his weight or his hair color or what he's wearing. She describes him in terms of what kind of a personality does he have? What sort of an impact does he have on the people he comes into contact with? And you form an image of this guy based upon that. The details of his physical appearance aren't so important. The details of his character and people's reaction to him are important. And in seeing that, it opened my eyes to a whole new way of writing. It's a very creative and entertaining way to convey your characters to folks. It's certainly more interesting and more fun as a writer to do it that way. And it's inspiring, to say the very least. And there's so many other things about that book that are so inspiring. The nature of the story itself is one that involves a person who they have poor self-esteem, and they're learning, Coyle, the main character, he's learning to accept that he's a good person, and he's learning to project to other people that he's a good person and that he has intelligence, and he struggles to gain love and acceptance from other people. It's the kind of a tale that resonates with most of us. I think most people have experienced something along those lines at one point or another. They want to be accepted. We all do. And watching Coyle go through the motions and succeed and fail, it's engaging. It's encouraging. It's a wonderful book. I recommend it to anybody.
So that's Annie Proulx, the shipping news.
The shipping news, yeah.
The shipping news, yeah. Well, I could tell how passionate you are about it. So I'll certainly recommend that to the listeners of the PR Maven podcast. And I know that I have some listeners who actually go out and get any book that's recommended or look into any app or any website. So that's part of this podcast that actually people do really respond to. So how can people buy the book or get in touch with you?
I have a website, spencerstevens.net, and contact information for me is on the website. My book is available in Kindle format on Amazon. It should be available on Amazon in paperback format very soon. I would say this week sometime probably. And my publisher, Maine Authors, Publishers and Cooperative in Thomaston, on their website, maineauthorspublishing.com, I think it is. When you go to their website and you click on bookstore, you see all their offerings. And one of them is Blood Lily. And you can click on that and it'll just follow along. It'll walk you through the process of how to make a purchase.
Right. Yeah. And I tried that out and I received my book in 2 days. So I was pleased with that.
It worked well. That's great.
So Spencer, thank you for joining us today. And you can also connect with Spencer on Facebook and Instagram, or by email at spencer@stevensassociates.net.
Correct. Stevens has a PH in the middle and an S on the end. Associates has an S on the end and then .net.
Right. It's right on the screen here too. So thank you for joining us today. And if you have any questions about the podcast, or if you'd like to hear from a specific guest, you can email me at nancy@prmaven.com. And I hope you have a great day, PR Maven Nation. Thanks for listening to this episode of the PR Maven Podcast. I invite you to share a review of the podcast on iTunes or your favorite podcast player. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you never miss an episode. You can also join the PR Maven Nation on Facebook. It's free to join, and it's a great community of like-minded individuals who are all looking to learn and grow from one another. If you use an Alexa device, use your Alexa app to search the skills and games section to find and enable the PR Maven Podcast Flash Briefing. This will give you access to exclusive content and more PR and marketing advice. Thanks again for listening, and have a great rest of your week, PR Maven Nation.